Good morning, everybody. My name's Tim Durant from Rupert Consult. I've been given the job of talking about the problems faced by public transport in rural areas. So I'm sorry that this is going to be a brief but quite negative presentation. But we thought it's important that we look at the problems, and then we can look at how the Smart Move project can help to overcome those problems. I'm originally from the UK, but now working in Germany. Some of the information I've included from my presentation is based on figures from England, and then after my presentation, some more information about the local area from George Spanos. Then we'll have a discussion about some of the problems you face in your areas as well, to see what the similarities and the differences are. The differences are across Europe. So as you can see from the picture, one of the problems can be poor quality buses, but obviously I was being a bit cheeky with that photo. So first of all, with rural public transport, it's providing a really vital service for rural communities, offering equal social and economic opportunities to residents in villages and towns in those rural areas. And offering public transport, of course, we want to encourage a shift from using the car all the time to using public transport for environmental reasons as well. So clearly public transport is a really crucial service in these rural areas. Some groups in society are particularly reliant on public transport. I've just included a few examples here for you. Older people that are no longer able to drive, clearly that's important. Younger people, people trying to find jobs and find access to education. Some figures from the UK show that actually the number of people in the age group 17 to 20, there's actually reducing numbers now have driving licenses. So there's an issue there of how do we get these people to jobs in other locations. People on low incomes, maybe they can't afford to run a car. Obviously unemployed people as well. Again, some information from the UK, some figures showing that relatively, maybe around half of jobs or even lower can be accessed via public transport in 30 minutes or less. So this can be an issue if people based in villages are trying to find employment. And also disabled people can be reliant on public transport. Again, from the UK, 60% of disabled households don't have their own access to a car. So again, it'll be interesting to hear about some issues in your countries as well shortly. So, but public transport, although it's a vital service, there are big problems and challenges for rural public transport. I'm going to talk just through some of the weaknesses which feed back into each other, and they can create a difficult situation to reverse. So essentially, rural public transport is getting worse rather than better, which is not what we want. So first of all, as Oliver mentioned, we're talking about public transport to villages. There's a lower population, and it's difficult to run public transport services on a commercial, profitable basis. So often there's a reliance on public subsidy. In the UK, again, in the period since 2011, there have been reductions in these subsidies to local authorities, and also the special bus service operators grants. So often, unfortunately, rural public transport services that require high levels of subsidies are those the first ones to be cut when there is a squeeze on public spending or reduced capacity for public spending. We also see socio-demographic changes in rural areas as well. It's a situation of the ageing society, which I think is occurring across Europe, particularly in rural areas, where the percentage of older people is becoming greater. This means that there's perhaps less, the travel behaviours become different. So are we checking that the public transport services we're offering are responding to those changes? And there are other problems, such as one that was discussed at the beginning of the Smart Move project. If there are less school children, then often the public transport services, the bus services for children going to school, are then cut back, and this means there's less bus services for other people as well. So these are some of the issues that we're dealing with. Obviously, in terms of the feedback, there can be then a shift to people buying their own cars. And once people have bought a car or have access to a car, they're more likely to use those for every trip rather than using public transport. One of the weaknesses perhaps of public transport in rural areas is there a lack of cooperation between public transport providers. Are services properly integrated? And perhaps the information provision on the public transport services is poor. And this is one of the main things that SmartMove seeks to counter by going proactively to people and providing them with the information they need to make sensible transport choices. And finally, public transport may not be adapted to the needs of users. Perhaps bus services have been the same for many years, and the operator hasn't looked at how they can vary the services or rationalise the services to make them more effective for the people in those rural areas. And again, the SmartMove approach seeks to create a feedback with users of the public transport so that you do get the information you need to update services. So, yes, on a slightly more positive note to end my presentation, after talking about a spiral of decline of public transport, obviously we are looking at ways as a community of improving public transport services and making them more popular in rural areas. A main part of that is the improved marketing and dialogue approach, which is what SmartMove is mainly about. We can look at alternative forms of bus service provision, which is something we talk about a little bit later on today. And enhancing the attractiveness of feeder systems. Again, we'll come back to this, but improving the services for cyclists and walkers so that they can gain access to public transport. But as Oliver was highlighted at the beginning of the day, the SmartMove approach doesn't assume that you have huge amounts of funding you can put into rural public transport. The project is really, and the approach is really about using what resources you have to the best to your best capability at this time, and trying to halt this sort of decline in rural public transport by encouraging more people to get back on board and use buses, trains, etc.